Hey, it's Alex Williams, the new Stack here, back in Portland after a good trip to KubeCon and getting ready next week for FutureStack in San Francisco. And I'm lucky enough to have joining me Jim Gochee. And Jim, we're going to be publishing this on the day of the first day of FutureStack. And so, just thinking about the show in advance and your visions of the community out there, and I have some questions about that as well, and how New Relic fits in this whole new world of microservices. So good to have you here, and look forward to this chat.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to talk to you this morning.
Excellent, excellent. So you're going into FutureStack, and there's a lot of movement in the market right now about monitoring, and you have focused for many years on application monitoring. I'm just curious on your guys' overall kind of view of the market right now, your theories, your beliefs, and how that affects you and your customers and in your overall ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, when we started the company about 8.5 years ago, you know, for us, the world was pretty simple. We thought Ruby on Rails was going to be the next big programming environment, and we wanted to have a monitoring tool for it. And of course, you know, Lou and I, in our history with Wiley, worked in this space, monitoring tools for Java applications. And you know, and back then it was primarily selling to large enterprise companies, and you know, very expensive product. And Lou and I, we had this belief that with you know, with software as a service and using you know, the internet as the distribution mechanism, you could bring the price down, and you could put it in a lot of people's hands. And that's kind of how we saw the world then. And a lot has changed since then. And I think the biggest thing that's really changed is not with New Relic, but what's happening with every business. And you know, we like to say every business is becoming a software business. You know, every company wants to connect digitally with their customer, right, through a mobile application or a web interface or other technology. That digital experience becomes so important, and industries of all types are being transformed. And you know, software is driving that, and software is hard, right? It's hard to write software, put it out into production systems, and then to have it work perfectly. It never works perfectly. And so you need tooling, and you need visibility, right, across all of the software experience for your customers. And that's kind of where we see ourselves now, a much bigger kind of charter and vision for the company. And really, we want to be there supporting all these businesses that are going through this digital transformation.
So you have this charter and this vision, and you talk about the market and how it's changed so much, and how business is at the center of at software, and increasingly we're seeing this connected world, right, where the software is increasingly connected. And you know, I'm curious on your guys, you know, what you're going to be talking about at FutureStack next week that relates to this whole connected new world that, you know, we're a part of. What is your philosophy going into this event, and what are you going to be talking about?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. The world is very connected right now. You know, applications are connected. So mobile apps are the most powerful when they're connected to the internet, either to other people or to other services. Networking is very powerful. What we're announcing, we're announcing several things at the conference next week. Very excited about it. You know, the first thing is we're kind of restating the category that we sell into, and why that's important is it communicates to our customers and to our investors, you know, where do we see ourselves and where are we going? And so the first thing that we're doing is we're talking about New Relic being a digital intelligence platform. And so, you know, we're not an application monitoring tool. You know, we're not just an infrastructure monitoring tool or an end user or analytics. We're all these things, but we're rolling that up and calling that digital intelligence platform, and speaks to our customers who all have digital initiatives. That's how they talk about it. And you might see this new executive role in big companies called the Chief Digital Officer, right? And their job is to help do the digital transformation at these companies. And so that's a very holistic concept, right? If I have a digital initiative, if I'm Domino's Pizza and I want to do all my pizza ordering and promotions online or through mobile, right? That's all digital. That's the digital customer experience. And so what are all the things that you would need to put into place, from a monitoring perspective and a data perspective to make sure that that is successful? So first and foremost, at our user conference, we're announcing this digital intelligence platform. And then we have several product updates that we're doing across our platform. So we have a pretty broad monitoring platform as it stands, and we're adding incremental capabilities to various parts of it. So in our alerting part of our platform, we're adding a really cool new feature called dynamic baseline alerts. And that's where we can look at historical trends in the data set, and we can predict, what normal is going to be. And if your current performance is outside of normal, we'll go ahead and alert you on that. We've got a great update to our mobile offering around crash analysis. And this is where we can add a lot more color and a lot more segmentation around crashes to really help you figure out, versions of operating systems or device types or versions of the code that are crashing, even down to which user is experiencing a crash. So if it's like a B2B mobile application, can you tell which of your customers are having a crashing experience? So we're very excited about that. And I would say probably the biggest thing we're announcing is our entrance into the infrastructure monitoring part of the market. Infrastructure monitoring has been around for a very long time. It was around long before application monitoring was. But if you think about it, infrastructure has evolved dramatically over the last decade. Infrastructure used to mean physical equipment that you put into a cage in a data center somewhere. And now when most people think about infrastructure, it's cloud infrastructure, which means very dynamic, and you got a lot more of it. And you don't necessarily give it the individual care and attention that you would a physical piece of equipment. If the thing's not working, you shut it down and restart another instance of it, right? It's kind of a different way of managing infrastructure. And we felt like there was a need for a new type of infrastructure monitoring tool. And that fits just beautifully into our platform. And then finally, we've got a really great sort of look into the future that we're going to be talking about around AI. And our theory is really this. Once you start collecting data about the entire customer experience, the entire digital infrastructure, it's a lot of data. It's really too much data for humans to look through, And so why not code algorithms to sort through that data, looking for the insights, looking for the actionable, the actionable things that we can pull out and hand that, just directly to developers and IT operators and DevOps folks, so they can get that part of the job done very quickly and move on to what they really want to do, which is keep building and keep creating their own digital experience.
The idea of infrastructure monitoring is something that we follow pretty closely here at the NewStack, and it gets to the heart of IT operations and the role of developers kind of in that in that world, right? I'm curious on your guys' thoughts on microservices in that context. There's such a kind of connection there, and when we're talking about microservices, we're also often talking about the components that are being monitored, as opposed to the overall application. I'm curious on your guys' philosophy on on that kind of changing approach. Considering that you guys do have a history of monitoring, that dates back to a time when you guys were well ahead of the game, but it was a different time as well.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot occur out there in our customer base. We have 15,000 customers who pay for New Relic and about 85,000 who use our free product. And so we saw the microservices trend in our customer base, I think long before people were really talking about it. What's made that trend a lot easier are, things like spinning up servers very quickly. In the last couple of years, we've seen the container trend really help also just in deployment. If it's easier to deploy a thing, then you can have a lot more of the things, right? In a microservice, I'm calling that a thing that you deploy. But if you take the friction out, and you can deploy hundreds of these things, then it opens up new possibilities around architecture. And I think microservices is a very interesting concept. It allows you to sort of create the smallest code component that you can, so that's good. But it also creates challenges in that it has a complexity factor in all of the things have to work flawlessly and interact with each other through remote API calls flawlessly, which can make debugging and deployment and management of that, it can make that more difficult, right? So I see the pros and cons associated with microservices, and we're very agnostic to it. We'll support customers that do it, and sort of let each customer each of our customers decide their own philosophy around it. But I think it's a very fascinating trend, and I think people are doing it because they can now, and it was hard to do that 5 years ago, but it's easy to do that now. And then I think just time will tell whether this is a style of developing code that really does work for people.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. And you did talk about containers, and you guys were very early in your involvement in the container world. I actually went and listened to I believe it was Alice. Her last name I'm forgetting. She spoke.
Alice Goldfuss.
Yeah, and she talked about your guys' earliest experiences with containers. It was at a container summit event put on by Joyent, and she talked about those early days. And you guys have been in it for you guys have really kind of helped pioneer the space in many ways. I'm curious about that, and I can see how there's still time to tell about microservices, but with containers. Each container really is essentially a component of a microservice. And so I'm curious on how you guys approach the tracking of a cluster of containers. And are you guys able to auto-discover, a service, with the things like a common name? And there's just all these, there's these subtleties that you get into that I'm curious about from your perspective.
Yeah. Well, containerization, it threw us for a bit of a loop when it first came out from a monitoring perspective, because it it hides the underlying server. It's kind of like virtualization in that respect. Hides the underlying server, and so when a container gets spun up with an application in it or a microservice, a New Relic is installed in that application or in that microservice, we monitor that. So we monitor the thing running inside of the container. But without API calls for us to inspect, it was hard for us to know where this container was running. In other words, what host was it running on? And so we worked with Docker, and we got them to add some APIs where we could inspect the system that we were running on, so that when you look at New Relic, you could correlate. It's like, oh, okay, I see. There's all these applications running in these different containers, but they're all running on this one host, right? And so sort of being able to have that linkage and that visibility was really important in the early years. We love containerization, so we've been heavy users of it ourselves. We had a couple of our employees who wrote a book about getting going with containers. I'm seeing it as a mega trend that's moving. It's the fastest trend I've seen in our customer base, from small companies all the way up to large companies. The value proposition is resonating really, really well. with customers, and we can validate. It takes a lot of friction out. It takes a lot of uncertainty, around what a developer thinks is supposed to happen, and then what goes into the test system, and then what goes out to production. It like streamlines that entire release cycle. And it also just reminds me, honestly, Alex, that we're still in an industry that's evolving quickly. So,
Right.
4 years ago, nobody saw it coming, even though I think Linux had the notion of a container in the operating system. It's had it for quite a while, but no one saw that trend coming, and it came very fast, and it moved very quickly.
Right.
And that's kind of that's the world that we're in. I feel like we're in this ever evolving place, but it's so exciting. Because we're making leaps and bounds. Our industry, software development and internet and whatnot and mobile, this industry is moving so quickly, and we feel like we're right in the middle of it and trying to keep up and support it all at the same time.
So we see this intersection of data, and I think data really speaks kind of the mega trend, right? And the ability to use data to do better automation and to get more out of your programming and to be able to like offer more different types of services. We see that in the intersection then, much more advanced forms of monitoring, which you guys have been on the forefront of. Then we see microservices, we see containers, and it almost does seem to lead to this story then about how do we take it to this next level? We like to say that there is this tyranny of choice out there, right? That Brian Cantor would say we haven't actually reached this point of peak confusion quite yet, and I would probably say that's probably right. But so when so those different kind of dynamics there, and then you're talking about infrastructure, operations, infrastructure monitoring, and IT operations and AI. What's your view on that intersection?
It's a great question. So yeah, there's so many new things at an early state of maturity, and it seems like there's more coming around all the time. And in some ways you could say AI. You could say AI is just another thing that it gets layered in. But what I think is just happening is there's just more and more things that are running, and more data to look at to try to piece together, especially in very complex environments and different architectures. We talked about microservices. If you have let's say we have a customer that has 800 microservices as part of their application. While each service is very simple, the pull all 800 together is a very complex system, right? And humans are going to have a hard time with that, but that's okay. Like, I feel like complexity is good in one sense, especially if you have technologies that support that complexity and make it easier to make it all work. And I think AI has the ability to do that. And so I feel like in many ways the intersection comes when AI can be applied, and you stop worrying about don't collect so much data because humans can never look at it. It's like, look, just keep collecting the data, and we will update the algorithms, and the machines will tell you what's going on and how to fix it, right? And I think we're getting to that stage where we might be another year or two out from that vision, but we're getting to that stage where that is the next evolution. Is people stop looking at the data and the machines are looking at the data, and I think that's where it kind of is very liberating and freeing. And then we can just keep creating even more data about different things and tying it in. But it's sustainable. You've created kind of a layer of abstraction that allows you to take the next leap forward.
So that leads me to questions then about the New Relic and how it views open source ecosystems, because increasingly what we're seeing in this level of innovation is increased interest in open source. And I think the container ecosystem is leaning very much towards open source project. We're seeing I think what you're talking to, for instance, we're seeing like telemetry projects such as Intel Snap, which is this API that that integrates, that collects data and then can integrate with like a tool like Grafana. And so I'm curious on where you guys, view yourselves, for, in this open source world, when you guys are, you've been building software that's very robust. How do you interface with that open source ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, we've always seen open source monitoring solutions. They've been around since there's been open source. Data collection, SNMP. Sorry, I always get that one confused. And so that there's always been open source technologies for collecting data and visualizing data. And then a lot of these open source platforms, I know some of the business models are for the companies the companies that sponsor the open source projects also sell like a management or monitoring package, and that's how they make money with it. Open source has been a huge part of the success of this digital transformation, digital revolution that's going on right now. It's created these building blocks that companies can extend and build on to do the things that they want to do as a business, right? So we fully acknowledge that and support it. And we've always felt like, though there was room for a commercial offering, a paid offering, where we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of man years invested in a tool that helps you make sense of all this complexity. And it's a tool that, if you think about the cost of your software developers and the cost of your business being successful, it's a tool that's very inexpensive. We do charge for it, but in the grand scheme of things, we think what we charge is a small price to pay. And we've always had that belief, and we've seen it time and again, even when we started the company in the Ruby on Rails community. So, Ruby on Rails, open source, that whole community, GitHub was a part of that in the early days, all open source. People still purchase New Relic. Why? Because we made their lives a lot easier. We were dedicated, our jobs full time was to make our customers' lives easier. Yes, they were using open source, but they still needed, fantastic monitoring, and we provided that.
Great. I think there's lots of viewpoints on this. We could probably talk for hours on the different kind of perspectives on open source, and I mean, by no means is it the only answer, right? And I think you guys are a testament to that. I think AWS is testament, to that in many respects. That there's a real need for services that are supported. But another question I do have is going back to kind of earlier when we were talking about AI. How do you guys see using AI and like machine learning to identify patterns and anomaly decisions? Those are kind of those are big issues that we see people talking about quite a bit. And there's lots of new companies out there that are trying to do this. There's that they're constantly kind of coming into this space. I'm curious on your perspective on that very specifically.
Yeah, I think where we're going to start is by coding up algorithms that are proven to work. And there's anomaly detection algorithms using seasonality baselining, where you can look back in time. You can look back, say, this time last week, and then you could go back a couple of weeks, and you can more heavily weight last week versus 3 weeks ago. You could also look at a little bit of recency and factor that in and say, okay, and what I'm seeing right now normal? So I don't think we have to innovate in the algorithms themselves, because there's been a lot of research published around, the different approaches. And what we want to do is take that and actually just package it up. And just as an example, let's say every time you do a code deployment, we run an analysis after things stabilize in the production system. We do an analysis and say, was that a good code deploy? Well, what's a good code deploy? Well, let's look at performance and error rates, and even things like throughput and say, does this look mostly like it did before the code deploy, or the last code base? Is it improved? Has it gotten worse? We could even crack it apart and say, let's look at each of the controller actions and see, these are the different parts of the web app. Let's look at each one individually and see if maybe one of those broke. Or let's see if a new database call was introduced that really bogged down the database. These are all the things that humans do manually after code deploys. They poke around, they look at the data. Why don't we just wire that up into an algorithm that runs? And that's just one example of the kinds of different types of algorithms that we can put out there. So our journey with AI will start, I think, very much on codifying known algorithms and heuristics that work, and codifying all of our experience in monitoring applications, coding that into the computer, and so it just basically reduces the what the operator has to do, what the user, the developer, the IT operations the person has to do. It reduces the amount of effort, reduces time to resolution, so they can get back to doing what they love to do, which is build their own software.
Well, I'm very excited about your guys' event next week, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk a little bit about your views and New Relic's kind of perspectives on the market. I know there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff coming up there. I'm particularly excited about hearing what Nate Silver has to say. I think we probably all are kind of thinking about the past week and and the results of the election and looking at kind of our own world and how we fit into that. So thank you for having us at your event, and I look forward to seeing you there next week.
Alex, it was a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to seeing you at the conference.
Excellent, Jim. Well, Jim, thanks again, and we'll be sure to be following your guys' news and announcements there. So see you in San Francisco.
Well, sounds good. We'll see you there.
Thanks.
Yep. Bye.